What's up, everybody? Crazy, crazy week. You know, we always say that. But you know what? We've got an awesome episode planned this week. 100th episode. Can you believe we recorded 100 of these things?
It doesn't feel like we've been doing this for that long, honestly. But you know what they say, time flies when you're having fun.
Well, I guess that means we're experts now, right?
We were already experts, but yeah, for sure.
That's what I was thinking as well. Yeah, welcome everybody. This is our 100th episode. This is episode 9 of this year. And what is this? This is the week of February, what did we say, the 25th?
26th.
Through March the 4th. 26th through March 4th. I always, that last day and going into the next day, I always get that one mixed up. But yeah, this is not really, because most of this, like what these albums all start in March. We
Yeah.
didn't have any albums really toward that end of February. I don't know what happened there, but all of these albums are going to be March and beyond, which is kind of cool, because the first album we're talking about will be, oh my gosh, it might be, I'm going to say will be, it's very possibly going to be the best album of the year that we're getting ready to talk about. I don't know, I haven't looked at the whole spreadsheet, but this is an album close to my heart. This band, I've loved this band forever, but I'm not going to get into that yet, because I need to go ahead and touch on, we've been talking about, when someone passes away, we will try to at least memorialize them one last time on here. I'm not going to give any type of eulogy, obviously, because I didn't know these people personally, but I did notice February 20th, we lost Bruce Barthol. He was 75. He was the bassist for Country Joe and the Fish. And that's more of a 60s band, right? A jam band and that kind of thing.
But we did review something by them, I believe. Maybe it was 1970.
Possibly. I think so. That's why, I recognized the name because it's just one of those jam bands. You could say it's a hippie band. I believe, I may be wrong, I think Country Joe and the Fish may have been at Woodstock. There are so many bands that were at Woodstock, I don't know. But I think that may have been the first time I saw that name. But, I'm familiar with Country Joe and the Fish. So I was sad to see that. And then finally, February 21st, we lost Jesse Gress. He was 67. He was an American rock guitarist, mostly, I said emotionally, well, maybe, but mostly a session guitarist. And he worked a lot with and recorded a lot with Todd Rundgren, which is funny because Todd Rundgren has an album on this episode. So that was, coincidental, I guess, but sad to see that because, it's sad anytime we see one of these great artists go. Sad to see anyone go. But, like I said, this week, oh my gosh, where do I begin? We're going to begin with March 1st, right?
Yes, I'm ready. Let's do this.
A little band from England that we've already talked about on the podcast before. I don't believe we reviewed Metal. It was from 1972. But I'm familiar with it. It's mostly atmospheric. Alright, I'm just stalling long enough. The album we're going to talk about first this week is one of the most famous albums of all time. Really.
And
This came out
rightfully
March
so.
1st. Oh yeah. Well, this came out March 1st, 1973. This is Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon. I've listened to this album. I didn't even have to listen to this album again to review it. I've listened to this album so many times from when I was younger. I think the first time I heard Pink Floyd was probably The Wall, but something like that, maybe on the radio. Who knows? I think Pink Floyd was already classic rock when we were listening. So, but this is their 8th studio album, and I'm not going to go heavily on, like I always talk about, the all the different personnel. I'm not going to get too heavily into that. Pretty much everyone knows who Pink Floyd is. You have David Gilmour, Nick Mason, Roger Waters, and Richard Wright. I mean, that's your core members of Pink Floyd now, because Sid Barrett was an earlier member, but he. I mean, I think the rumor is, and I think it's pretty well known as fact. I don't want to disparage the man, but I believe he did a little bit too much LSD and had some mental issues to begin with, maybe some depression, and I can't remember. I read about it before, and I've talked about it in past podcasts because I don't know if we both had his solo album, but
Yeah, I believe so.
yeah. So, and I mean, you could tell that the man had demons. So, after. This is a little bit after Sid Barrett. And like I said before, Metal came out in '72. We were on hiatus, so we didn't listen to that. I've listened to that before because I went ahead and explored Pink Floyd's catalog. Pink Floyd is like one of my absolute favorite bands. If I had to pick a band from the '70s, they're right there. I mean, they're top three. I'm gonna say that. And I mean, Dark Side of the Moon. There's so much that's been said about it. There is a special 50th anniversary release. I believe it's out now. I know it was coming out. I haven't seen if it's out yet. I would like to get my hands on it. I know the conservatives, some conservatives were mad about it because it has the rainbow on it. Oh, I try not to get political on this show, but I mean, how ignorant can you get? It's a prism. It's the American education system. We need to put money into the schools. But anyway, get off the high horse on that one. But one thing I didn't mention when I was talking about the personnel in the production of this album, I was excited to see Alan Parsons. This is before Alan Parsons' project, if I'm not mistaken. But I was already familiar with Alan Parsons too, so I thought that was pretty cool. Um, this is, I don't know if I mentioned it. This is the overall third best-selling album of all time. So, I mean, you already know if it's the third best-selling album of all time. Everyone knows this album. You can you can show the cover and people have probably seen it. I mean, kids might be wearing the shirt and they may not know the actual songs that are on this album, but they know who Pink Floyd is. So, I think I mentioned Metal, but I think the album before this was the music for a soundtrack. Because when I was looking at their discography, Pink Floyd's discography, Obscured by Clouds came up, and I'd never seen that one before. And I started researching, trying to find out what that was, and it's a French film, so that's why I was not familiar with it. And it's La Vallée by Barbet Schroeder. So if anyone out there is a fan of French cinema, you can check that out. I haven't had a chance to check that out, but I do plan on going back and seeing if I can listen to that music because it's right before Dark Side of the Moon. So it has to be, some atmospheric, in between Metal and Dark Side of the Moon. So it has to be some more of this atmospheric, dreamy, almost esque music, I would think, at times. And who knows, there may be some, David Gilmour guitar licks in it. I mean, they're in this album for sure. There were two singles. You have Money and Us and Them. But other than the interludes, I mean, most of these songs could be singles. Yeah, I don't really know that there's any song on this album that couldn't be a single. I like the way on this album the songs flow into one another. You can tell this was made as an album. There isn't silence in between tracks. A lot of times you will have like at the beginning, like the first track is just Heartbeat, but as soon as it flows into Breathe in the air, it just goes right into it. So you really don't know, in between tracks. I mean, unless you're just watching, unless you already know what the songs are. But if this is your first time listening to this album, you could, you put this thing on the vinyl, and most likely a lot of people listening to this, I'm not going to say everyone, because obviously everyone's not doing this. A lot of people probably were doing a little bit of psychedelics as well. So it lends itself to that. That's probably why people say, what is it, The Dark Side of Oz? Yeah, I don't know if anyone out there has watched that. It's on YouTube. You can actually get that on YouTube. Someone evidently figured out you can take The Wizard of Oz and sync it up to the Dark Side of the Moon album and play them at the same time. And I mean, it does have quite a few synchronicities. It does work. It works. So I don't know. We plan on watching it again this week. We were gonna try to watch it before, we being Autumn and I, my wife, and we were gonna try to watch it before, but I've just been listening to the album so much that I just didn't make time for it. But I'm not gonna I'm not gonna go too heavily into the songs. I mean, if I went track by track and told you the ones I like, it'd be every one of them. There's not there's not a weak song on this album. I think one interesting fact that I'm just going to turn it over to you in a minute. I did find out originally this album was called Dark Side of the Moon, and there was another artist, and I don't have his name right in front of me right now, but he had an album that was Dark Side of the Moon, and it was not commercially successful. But for a little bit, this album became like Dark Side of the Moon from Pink Floyd was known as Eclipse. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And I don't have that name right in front of me, that artist. I did look him up earlier and listen to his Dark Side of the Moon. I can see why it wasn't successful. It's okay. It's more like a folk thing. It's all right, but it's not it's nothing. I can see why Pink Floyd was able to get that Dark Side of the Moon back. One thing before I turn it over to you, I will finally say, I think later this year, Roger Waters is going to re-release Dark Side of the Moon with just his input. I think instead of the guitar parts, there's going to be like spoken word stuff. And you know what? I'm not going to listen to it. I'm not going to listen to it. I try to listen to everything. I don't respect Roger Waters anymore. I respect his art, and I respect his bass playing. But as a person, he is just a prize human being.
He's a jerk.
Just a real piece of work. He played in Chicago here, and someone had free tickets, and I said not even for free. I won't even go for free. So it's a shame that someone that produced such wonderful art can't get along with his other bandmates, and who knows? They could have done something else. They're still they were still performing separately, but I guess that's neither here nor there. I guess I don't want to end it on a sour note, but yeah, Roger Waters, I'm just not a huge fan. I'm a big David Gilmour fan. I love him all over this album, but I don't know. I guess if I had to pick a favorite track on this album, Money. I don't know. They're all so good. I mean, any of them. The Great Gig in the Sky. Time.
My answer would be different every time you asked me.
Yeah, Breathe in the Air when it kicks in. It's just so nice. This whole album's good. But anyway, like I said, I'm gonna turn it over to you because there's nothing I can say about this album that's not already been said. Yeah, I'm just gonna go ahead and tell you this is a 5-star album. It is. There's a reason this is the third best selling album of all time, and I plan on I'm gonna try to find an original vinyl, but we'll see. I don't know, but I'm gonna turn it over to you and see what you thought about Dark Side of the Moon.
You know what I think about Dark Side of the Moon, but that's okay. Like you said, there's not a whole lot to say about it that hasn't already been said, but I have a lot to say anyway. I love Pink Floyd. They are one of my favorite acts of all time. I love their lyrics. They are, well, they're poetry like John Cale's was, but much more accessible and easy to understand and relate to, so not like John Cale's. I love their music. I love David Gilmour's guitar work. It's incredible and unique, and just, it gets me excited about music. I'm passionate about this. I love Pink Floyd. And I do already know Dark Side of the Moon. Of course I do. I feel like you can't say you love 70s music and Pink Floyd specifically and not know this album. And I have listened to it before, multiple times. So this wasn't surprising or new to me in any way. But I did listen again for this show, twice actually, once on Spotify and once on one of the re-released albums. I don't have the original vinyl. God, I wish I did, but I don't. But we do have one of the re-releases. So I did listen again, partly because I just wanted to, and partly because I've listened to it, but I've never listened to it with the intention of reviewing and speaking intelligently about it. I've just listened for personal enjoyment before. And there goes my cat making noise. I guess he wants to talk about Pink Floyd too. No, that does definitely play a role in a review. It's a whole different type of listening experience when you're really getting down to it and analyzing the nitty-gritty stuff. It's different than just listening, for your own enjoyment.
I would say listen to this album in good headphones. If you have some good headphones, I would say that's probably the best way to experience that, or with a good surround sound system. But it's like the sound travels around you, the way they produced it. I don't know about a vinyl. If you're listening on vinyl, that's probably the best way to listen to this. But, in this day and age, if you're on Spotify or whatever, because when I'm listening on Spotify with some good headphones, the production on this is impressive. But yeah, I just wanted to, interrupt. I haven't spoken in a couple minutes,
That's alright. Yeah, listen to this many times. Very familiar with it. Having said all that, Dark Side is not my favorite Pink Floyd album. That's probably A Wish You Were Here, maybe The Wall. Those have my favorite Pink Floyd songs on them, Wish You Were Here and Comfortably Numb. But this is close as well. The band just had a really great streak in the 70s, starting with this album. I hardly even know what to say or where to start. I mean, it's great. I don't want to sound like I am just gushing all over myself, but I can't help it. There were only the two singles, like you mentioned, Money and Us and Them, and they are both great songs, but there's also Time and Breathe and Brain Damage. And those are very well-known songs as well, and deservedly so. The first track, as you mentioned, Speak to Me, I guess you could kind of say it's filler, if you're really being critical. It's really not a separate song, though. It's an intro, and then that second song hits, and it's just like, yeah, close your eyes, lay back, and enjoy the ride. I'm not talking about a drug trip, even if the band was on some pretty strong stuff. I'm sure this would be the perfect soundtrack for that if you're into it. But I'm just talking about enjoying it, really enjoying the music. It's the kind that speaks to a person's soul. It just gets you. I sound super pretentious, but I can't help it. And I do think that those two songs, Speak to Me and Breathe in the Air, I believe they were originally just a single track. Later editions separate them. But from what I have read, I believe that they were combined into one track on the original release. I could be wrong. It's kind of hard to say because they do flow together so well. They are separate tracks on Spotify and on the re-released vinyl that we have. Everything, you mentioned it, and I think I've got some more about it later in my notes, but the album is made to flow perfectly. So there's a lot of that throughout this. And that second track, I only briefly mentioned it by name before, Breathe in the Air. It's one that I think is a little bit under the radar, even for me. I tend to forget about it among all of the other great songs in Pink Floyd's discography. But I really like it. It's really well done. The vocals and the instrumentation are kind of, well, there's really no better way to say it. They're kind of breathy. It just all fits really well together. Like I said, and like you said, the album is made to flow perfectly, too. It is a concept album. not to match with The Wizard of Oz, but yeah, it pretty much does. I've watched that as well. But every track leads directly and smoothly into the next one. It's telling one story. There is an extended silence at the end of On the Run that leads into time, so I will mention that, but it's intentional. Speaking of time, frequent listeners know that I have misophonia. I hate bells and whistles and chimes and anything that's too busy or chaotic because it hurts my head. So I did want to bring that up. If you know the song Time, you know where I'm going with this. That song starts off with an alarm clock going off, and it's joined quickly by several other clocks of varying types. It's loud and it's chaotic and it's annoying. On purpose, though. It is the type of thing that would usually drive me crazy, and I can't say I love it here either. But, and that's a big but, cue the booty jokes from you, I don't hate it.
Her Mix-a-Lot would be proud.
You know, I don't hate it. You know, I can't entirely explain why. Maybe it's partly just immersion therapy from hearing it so very much. It doesn't hurt my head as much as other similar stuff does. And it is also pretty short-lived. It doesn't have time to really get to me. See what I did there? It doesn't have time. Maybe I've been listening to a little too much Pink Floyd. Now, it's short enough that it doesn't really, get to that point. It doesn't get to me and bounce around inside my skull, which is how those things normally feel. It's like they get louder and louder and more irritating as they continue on and on and on. This doesn't have the chance to get really bad like that. So, the beginning is not great, but I can live with it. I don't even skip it when I'm listening to the album. The rest of the song is very worth it anyway. Sort of dreamy. The classic Pink Floyd bendy guitar is fantastic. Well, it's not exactly a solo. There's percussion and stuff, but for a time, the guitar takes center stage to great effect. I did it again accidentally, for a time. No. At one point, the guitar is really prevalent, really in the foreground, and it's just great. And the backing vocals are ideally suited and really well done. It's an incredible song, but I did want to bring up the chime, alarm stuff. Those backing vocals are extended into the following track too, by the way, The Great Gig in the Sky. They are so soulful, and they're gospel. I know that it's Claire Torrey on Great Gig in the Sky.
Yeah, I was about to mention her name because I forgot to earlier. I know she was embarrassed because she was so exuberant in the studio until she saw how, happy they were with her performance. But I believe she sued the band later on, and they settled out of court.
Yeah, for writing credit, but she did get that credit.
Yeah, but I guess she didn't really write anything, she didn't really sing any words. So
No.
I think that's a frivolous lawsuit. Pink Floyd had lots of money, so they were like, go away. So, beautiful, beautiful background vocals, but come on, sister. Come on. Let's not play around here. You didn't write anything, and you didn't sing any words. You did add a lot of soul to it. Give credit on that. Come on.
Yeah, it's just wordless vocalizations, I'm not going to even try to emulate her sound and her style, but it was basically just, oohs and ahs. But God, they sound so good. And like I said, I know it was Claire Torrey on Great Gig in the Sky. They're the same sounding, stuff is on other tracks. They don't have her specifically mentioned in the personnel list. They have all the other backing vocalists listed. So I can't be entirely sure if it's her on the other tracks or if she is just on Great Gig in the Sky. But those backing vocals, or at least a very similar style of those vocals, are on other songs. They're just not quite as prominent on those other ones. And I'm not intentionally going track by track on this, but everything is just so well done and well put together that it's really hard not to. Like I said, I'm really passionate about this. I am trying to restrain myself a little bit. I'm not exactly pulling that off, but oh well, this is my chance to talk. So then you get to side two. Money is a little bit of an outlier to me in terms of Pink Floyd songs. I've always thought it's not really a typical Pink Floyd song, at least the way I think of them. You can tell that it's them, but it's not necessarily the same exact style that you might be expecting. But it's also really well positioned on the album for that. It's the first track of side two, so the differentness, the uniqueness doesn't really interrupt the flow of the album. It's already been unavoidably mechanically interrupted anyway. These days we can listen to it all on Spotify or whatever and not have to get up and flip the album, but back in 1973, side A ended and it just stopped until you got up and physically switched over to the other side. So there was a gap there anyway that you don't have now. But honestly, it's not bad now if you're listening on Spotify either. I think the ending side A with that mostly instrumental track, Great Gig in the Sky, was a good choice. So the difference is even a little less jarring than it might have been otherwise. I don't know if that was really what they intended, but they did a good job on it. And Money is a great song, even though it may not be, as Pink Floyd as some of their other stuff. But that guitar, the saxophone by Dick Perry, it's just good. I can't criticize anything about it for sure. I really enjoy it. And then Us and Them, the other single, that one is on the album right after Money. It's kind of a bridge back to the more typical sound. The two songs do flow together seamlessly, like all the rest of it. Us and Them still has that saxophone, but it also has those soulful, gospely background vocals of the other songs that I've already mentioned. I'm trying to pick up the pace a little because I can't help it. I've got a lot to say about this one, and I know that you already know where I'm going with this. But Us and Them, again, leads seamlessly into the next track. It's the instrumental, Any Color You Like. I will say, I don't have a lot to say about that one. That one is probably the one that I would most consider filler on the album. I don't mind it. It just sounds like a long extended outro to Us and Them. So there's not a lot to say about that track specifically. But the next one, Brain Damage, there's a lot to say about that one, but what more do I need to say about it? I love that song. There's more of those backing vocals that tie it in to the previous tracks, and it's kind of out there, but in a really fun and even sort of a poignant kind of way. I don't want to come across as pretentious, because if you know me, you know I am definitely not. I've got no reason to be. But the song does have real meaning behind it. And, if you listen to it, it's good. I will say that, it doesn't flow as seamlessly from Any Color You Like as the other transitions on the album. But that's just me being super nitpicky and honestly looking for something to say that isn't just fangirling over Pink Floyd. And that song is also where you get the line that led to the title of the album. It's sort of like delayed gratification, at least for me. I get a little bit of a thrill from it, honestly. Like, yeah, there it is. I'll see you on the dark side of the moon. Yeah. You don't get that until, I believe it's the very last line of Brain Damage, which is the next to last track. I love how that song builds as it progresses. It's quiet and loud, and then it builds into Eclipse, the last track, which is louder and harder. And honestly, if I am not watching, I don't even catch the switch over from one track to the other on that. Again, seamless. It's perfect. The engineers and producers and everyone who worked on the tech side of this did a great job, so I want to give them credit too. Oh, and I did want to mention Chris Thomas was the mix supervisor on this. We talked about him briefly last week because he played tambourine on John Cale's album. But I said he was really known for his behind the scenes work with other huge artists, and this is one of those. And finally, album art. It is great too. I said everything was great about this, and that includes the design. I'm not going to talk at length about it. I think we all probably know what this album looks like. It wouldn't matter if it was an LGBTQ pride thing. It's not. Not everything colorful or even rainbow is quote unquote woke.
Colors are gay. Colors are gay. Rainbow's gay. Colors are gay. They've taken it over.
I guess I am considered woke, and I'm not against that at all. It's preferable to the alternative. But just because something is colorful doesn't mean it's making a particular socio-political statement. It's science. There's a prism with light shining through, which makes a rainbow. That's how light works. And also, I'm really an 80s kid as much as I love talking about this 70s stuff. So, yeah, rainbows. If you're an 80s kid.
So what you're saying? Well, so what you're saying is light's gay.
Everything is gay.
Light's gay because it's a rainbow.
Uh-huh. Anyway, we're not going to go there. No. It's a striking design. It's mostly black. It just has that one very saturated and brighter, colorful bit. So it really works. It's memorable. It's iconic. It's just really good design.
Yeah, it was designed by Hypnosis. We've talked about his work before.
Yeah, it's really well done. Like I said, it's iconic, and we probably all know what that looks like. So, it's effective. That's probably one of the best examples of album design when you can say the name of the album and everyone around you immediately pictures it. Alright, I have gushed about Dark Side of the Moon for long enough. I warned you at the beginning, I am passionate about this. So, it would be dumb to try to beat around this particular book. I agree, this is a 5-star album. I thought going in that it was going to be, but I was a little nervous. As always, when I listen with a more analytical purpose, that it's going to end up being slightly lower, that I'm going to be a little more critical than I normally am. Not much, maybe 4.5 or so, but no. My previous love and my joy about this album were actually only confirmed by this listing, if not even multiplied. It is definitely 5. And if somehow you haven't already listened to Dark Side of the Moon, please, I am begging you, go do that for your own benefit. You need to hear this album. Alright, I'm done. Emphatically, 5 stars.
Yeah, I think that this is our first 5-star album of the year.
I believe so. Well, for me, Elton John was.
Yeah. So, but I think overall, this is our first 5 that we both thought was a 5. Elton John was still 4.5 for me. So I believe it when we scored those, because Elton's 5-star album's coming up, but we're getting ahead of ourselves there. Yeah. I already knew going into this was going to be a 5-star album. I just confirmed it by listening to it over and over again, as I always have since I discovered this album. Yeah, if you've been living under a rock or afraid of rainbows, just give this album a shot. You'll see. So yeah, Dark Side of the Moon, 5-star album, first 5-star album of the year, and what an awesome way to start the program. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Jeff's Just Jammin'. It's been a while since I've flown solo. I usually have Amy to bounce my ideas off of. whether or not she's receptive or not. We do have solo albums now, like, in theory only. We don't just get on here usually and speak into the microphone without someone to speak to, other than you guys. But this week is a special occasion because our 100th episode, we have a lot of things going on. So we've decided to switch things up a little bit and go old school, I guess I should say. Now, this year has been a good year for Jeff's Just Jammin' albums. I don't believe I've had one below a 3.5 star. And I'm going to go ahead and spoiler alert at the beginning of this. Slight spoiler alert. That's not going to break the trend this week either, because this week has been a pretty good week. Not the best, I will say that, but it still was very good. I'm going to go ahead and get right into it, actually. This week, my album for Jeff's Just Jammin' came out March 1st, 1973. And this is a band that we are already highly familiar with. I mean, we've reviewed a couple albums from this band, and we're familiar with some of the later work. This band is Fleetwood Mac. The album that I'm going to talk about right now is Penguin. Interesting album title. I guess John McVie was a big fan of penguins. He used to live near the zoo in, I think, part of London. I don't have that right in front of me, but I do remember reading that. So I thought that was pretty interesting, actually. And, Penguin is Fleetwood Mac's 7th album. We started about album, I want to say 4, because they do have stuff in the 60s, but we started in 1970 with, the start of the Chord Chronicles podcast. We had Kiln House in 1970, and we also had Future Games in 1971. Both of those albums were 3.5 stars. They weren't what I was accustomed to. There was no Stevie Nicks, obviously, because this is not late 70s. This is early 70s, the beginning. So that's one thing about Fleetwood Mac. The lineup changes quite a bit, and it changed quite a bit through the years, I guess I should just say. We did take our hiatus, so we did miss Bare Trees. But I actually went back and listened to Bare Trees after listening to Penguin, because I read a little bit into the breakup of the band once again, or at least one member. With this band, you're going to notice a lot of infighting at times. They just had trouble getting along. And that happened with Bare Trees. Danny Kirwan was a huge influence in Fleetwood Mac with, I believe, Future Games and Bare Trees. And with Bare Trees, you can really tell, because Danny Kirwan is an amazing guitarist, and he was responsible for a lot of the writing for Fleetwood Mac at that time. Well, there was an altercation on tour during Bare Trees, during the when they were touring for that. So they just all voted, they being the band, voted to kick him out. So with Penguin, this is their album after Danny Kirwan, and they decided to bring in Bob Weston and Dave Walker. Honestly, and this is the first one and only one to feature Dave Walker. I'm going to run through like the basic personnel, because the personnel list is pretty extensive. You can catch that on Wikipedia if you do so desire. You have Bob Welch on guitar, vocals, and bass on one of the tracks. You have Bob Weston on lead guitar, slide guitar, banjo on harmonica, and harmony on vocals on one of the tracks. Christine McVie, I'm going to stutter, keyboards and vocals. Dave Walker does vocals on a couple of the tracks and harmonica on one of the tracks. And then you have John McVie playing bass guitar. And finally, Mick Fleetwood, drums and percussion. And I believe this is the first time that Mick Fleetwood has been credited with drums and percussion, even though he has been, he's been playing drums and percussion for them for a while. He's also responsible for production as well. Well, this album One thing I would say about it, it's very disjointed. A lot of people don't like this album. If you look online at reviews about it, they don't like tracks like I'm a Road Runner. I agree because it doesn't seem like it fits on a Fleetwood Mac album. It does have a blues feel to it, but with the vocals, they just don't have that Fleetwood Mac sound. So, I can understand people having problems with it. But that being said, I'm always going to say it, guys. There was a single. It was Did You Ever Love Me? That does sound like a little bit more of what your traditional Fleetwood Mac, if there is such a thing. It's more of a pop, radio friendly type thing. It's pretty good, but it didn't chart, so it didn't have, really very much success. Well, the track that I would tell everyone, or tracks that I would tell everyone to look out for on this album, would be Revelation and Night Watch. Those two are really good. And I mean, there are other good tracks throughout this album. You can tell that Fleetwood Mac is working toward a cohesive unit. And the problem I think in this band, or in this band, in a lot of ways, they didn't have a cohesive, like a leader almost. Everyone would wanted to be the front person, because I mean, Christine McVie was a front as well as, everyone else almost, because so that can lead to infighting at times. But I believe the focus is starting to come together. It's all starting to come together. A lot of people, like I said, don't like this album, but I can see where Fleetwood Mac is heading, and it's exciting to me. I did waver back and forth. Like I said before, the last two albums that we did review were each 3.5 stars. And I probably would give Bare Trees a 4-star, because I think the writing in it is excellent, and the both guitars, like, that Fleetwood Mac dual guitar sound is there. The vocals aren't my favorite, but they're okay still. I would give it 4 stars. Well, this album, I would give this one 4 stars as well. That's what I'm going to give it to, because a lot of people out there try to give this 2 stars because it is disjointed. I agree, and I normally would not give it, an album, because we're supposed to be reviewing these things for albums as a whole. But I'm still going to give this 4 stars because there are some really bright points throughout it. I mean, there are really only 2 songs that I would consider filler. The last song, Caught in the Rain, would be the only song that would be a throwaway for me. It's just kind of there. It's an instrumental. It's just whatever. But everything else is great. So don't sleep on this album. Don't pay attention to those other reviews online before you check this album out for yourself, because I think it's a really underrated album. 4 stars, Fleetwood Mac Penguin. 2 albums in a row. We had a 5-star Dark Side of the Moon, and now I had this Penguin 4-star surprise. I really hope the next album's going to be good, but stay tuned. We'll see. And we're back. Both of us this time. That Pink Floyd was amazing, like we just talked about. And that Fleetwood Mac that I had was surprisingly good. So, like I just said previously, if you haven't had a chance to check out Fleetwood Mac's Penguin, it's a little bit underrated, I believe. So, give it a shot. I don't think you're going to be disappointed with it. It's a good, you can see where the direction that the band is heading. So, but our next album that we're getting ready to talk about is a band that we're already familiar with. I mean, when you're listening, when you're thinking 70s rock, Slow Ride, that's definitely going to be on a 70s playlist. If you just have a 70s best of 70s greatest hits or something like that, you're going to see this band, because this band is Foghat. And I mean, is the album title Foghat, or is it rock and roll?
That is a good
It's because
question.
they had an album in '72, which I guess, hiatus once again. I keep mentioning it. We missed that one. It's titled Foghat. Well, they also have in this album we're getting ready to talk about, '73, Foghat, different album. Most people call this rock and roll because the cover is pretty simple. Upper right corner, you just have Foghat, the band's title, and then you just have a picture of a stone and a picture of a roll, so like a bread roll. So I'm guessing they were just being tongue in cheek about it. Cheeky, This is their like I said, their self-titled album, second one. Um, I didn't know that Foghat was a English band growing up though, because when they sing, they almost sound like an American band to me. So I just always assumed they were an American band. So I was surprised when I read that. But there's not a lot about this album. When you go try to find, Wikipedia about it or just any information, you find a little bit. But like the album cover, everything's pretty brief and open for self-expression, or I guess the way you self-interpretation, like the way you're going to interpret it. But this is pretty straightforward music. Foghat is just what I would think would have been then an amazing concert. Like I think their live show would have been a lot of energy, and at times I think they it's just blues rock, and hard rock, and just good fun music. Like we just talked about Pink Floyd, a lot of it is intellectual and deep. It's a little more subdued. I mean, there are points in Pink Floyd where you have guitar solos and things like that, but they're not going to have a song like Ride, 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 which is the first track on this album. It's a standard, what I would call like a standard blues hard rock track. I liked it. It's a lot of energy. There's a lot of energy in it. I'm not gonna go track by track. Like a lot of the songs, I will say they pretty much do sound pretty cohesive. The album is cohesive. It doesn't venture out of they didn't go experimental a lot on this album. I will give it that. Track two, I haven't had a chance to go and listen to the original of this song. Is I Feel So Bad, and it's from 1954. It's Chuck Willis, and Elvis actually recorded as well. So I haven't listened to the other recordings of this, but it's a pretty good song. I was it was hard for me because this week is so packed full of good albums. When you put this album in it, like, it sounds awful. This album falls short next to these other albums that we're going to talk about this week. Even the Fleetwood Mac that I just talked about for my Jeff's Just Jammin', it overshadows this album because this is not a bad album. I'm going to mention the personnel real fast. You have Dave Peverett on vocals and rhythm guitar, Rod Price on lead and slide guitar, amazing slide guitarist, Tony Stevens on bass, and Roger Earl on drums. Just a lot of energy that this band brings, and I would have loved to have seen them live. I think the concert would have been great. So I don't have a lot to say other than I think this is an underrated album in a lot of ways, and it's just going to get lost in the shuffle this week because we just have too many good albums. There's a lot of albums this week, but I'm just gonna just leave it at that. I'm not gonna give my stars yet, but I think this album's a bit underrated, and maybe it's just because I'm a blues rock fan. If you're a fan of blues rock and you already like the song Slow Ride, you're probably gonna like this. I don't think I mentioned this album did come out March 1st alongside Dark Side of the Moon. So I'm sure it was overshadowed greatly at the record store. But what did you think about Foghat rock and roll?
I absolutely agree with you on that. It's an okay album. It's just this is a tough week to have an album that isn't just a huge standout. Yeah, I mean, like you said, it was competing with Dark Side of the Moon, which tends to overshadow pretty much everything. And this isn't anywhere near that level. I have to be honest and say that. But I didn't expect it to be, and I don't need it to be. Not everything has to be life-changingly great. It is good though. It's good standard 70s rock, blues rock like you said. I will say, definitely do be careful when you're looking for this on Spotify. Like you said, you know, there are two self-titled albums, and this one is known as Rock and Roll. It is listed as Rock and Roll, aka Foghat, on Spotify, but even that, the band has another album from, I'm going to say next year. It's next year for us. It's 1974. And that one's called Rock and Roll Outlaws. So it can get a little confusing. Even my husband Luke, when he added this to his playlist, he actually had Rock and Roll Outlaws on that. So I caught it before he listened. But just make sure that you are listening to the right thing if you are following along with us. I don't have a ton to say about this one. I'm sure you're all relieved after that diatribe that I had to say about Pink Floyd. It's Too Late was probably my favorite off the album. I bet that surprises some of you. You probably thought I was going to say Feel So Bad, since that is a classic blues song by Chuck Willis. He's the same guy who did C.C. Rider, or maybe the love child of Chuck Norris and Bruce Willis. That would be interesting. But I digress. That song was good. Feel So Bad. It's a blues song. But I actually thought that It's Too Late was better. That's unusual for me. I do tend to go for the bluesy stuff. But I really liked It's Too Late. It's nothing specific about it. It's nothing really unusual. It just had a good 70s rock sound. None of the others really stood out to me, but I don't have a whole lot to say, but I don't mean to give the impression that I didn't like the album. It was pretty good. I guess you could say it's not really all that special, but it sounded fine, it sounded good, and I feel like my notes that I am sharing don't really reflect the quality of the album. I'll go ahead and give my star rating. I gave it 3.5. It feels a little, a little low, but not really. It is fine. It is overshadowed by some of the other stuff that came out this week. It's also overshadowed by some of Foghat's other work, even. But it does sound good. It's just not great. Pretty good, though, and I'd still recommend it.
Yeah, we're in absolute agreement there. Like, I felt like I was rating it too low because I always give it the half bump or whatever, but I don't know. I think 3.5 is a fair score. It's still a good score for the album. There's nothing that's like, they didn't take any chances on this album. I will say that it's pretty standard, fair. If you're a fan of blues rock, hard rock like that, and if you already know Slow Ride and that kind of stuff, you're gonna like this album. It's just one you can put on and enjoy. But up, in the middle of all these other albums that we have this week, no, it's most definitely, it's probably going to be as far as the ones that I've listened to, it's the weakest of the week. That sounds awful. The weakest that we have had, to present this week.
The weakest of the W-E-E-K, yeah. Not the W-E-A-K.
English language, you have to love it out there. But yeah, 3.5 stars. Foghat, self-titled, or Rock and Roll. I'm always gonna call it Rock and Roll, and I'm gonna put it, on all the podcast stuff as Rock and Roll. I could put a picture of a stone and a bread roll, I would, but I just can't do that. So Foghat just messing with everyone. But yeah, 3.5 stars. Check it out, everyone. You're not going to be disappointed, but don't listen to it alongside all these other albums we're going to talk about because it's not going to stand up to those. That's the only caveat I would say. I think next we have a new segment coming up, and I haven't had a chance to listen to the album that he's going to talk about. He being Luke. So I'm going to, I guess we're going to take a quick break. And when we get back, Luke loves listening.
All right, everybody, we're back. Well, at least a couple of us are. I'm here with actually my husband, Luke, and Luke loves listening. So we have enlisted him to help us out with some of these bigger weeks where we have more albums. So this is his first week, his first solo segment, and I'm just going to pass it off and let him talk about his album, starting with who and what it is, and if you've got that information, when it came out, Luke.
All right, so we have Electric Light Orchestra, ELO. I don't have the exact date that this album came out. It's ELO 2 or Electric Light Orchestra 2. I've seen it both ways. This is supposedly the first one where they started using that abbreviation instead of their full name, and they dropped the at the beginning, so they stopped being the Electric Light Orchestra. But they're an English band formed in 1970, but really they formed in 1964-ish. They were a previous band called The Move, and all three of the founding members of ELO, Jeff Lynne, Roy Wood, and Bev Bevan, were in The Move before they struck off to do their new thing, which is a more pop meets classical meets science fiction blend. So as you can probably guess, this is their second album after their self-titled, which came out in 1971. And by this point, Roy Wood has left the band by the time this is released. He still shows up on a couple of the tracks on ELO 2, but he left to form a new band and took a couple of their backing musicians to form Wizard or Wizard, I don't know. A lot of Z's thrown in the middle. And spoiler, they have a debut later in 1973, so I think you might be hearing them. So Jeff Lynne is now the undisputed mind behind the band. He wrote, arranged, produced, a multi-instrumentalist. He's all over this. It's pretty much his thing. And they added Richard Tandy to the lineup on keyboard and a few other musicians to cover the cello and violin and whatever Roy Wood would have been doing. So runtime on this is pretty standard, about 42 minutes, but there's only 5 tracks. So as you can guess, they are lengthy tracks. And I didn't intend to go through this just track by track, but that's kind of how it ended up. The first one is Old England Town, Boogie Number 2. This is one of the songs that does have Roy Wood on cello, even though he's not in it. It's very orchestral, and probably the closest thing I can think of that this sounds like would be soundtrack music, or like George Martin, the tunes that he penned for the Beatles on like side 2 of Yellow Submarine. That's what this sounds like. There are vocals, but they are nothing like the Beatles, and it's kind of jarring whenever they come in. I don't know if it's just too much reverb or a weird soundboard mix or what the problem is, but the vocals not the best here, and that kind of sorry.
No, that's okay. I was just gonna say, so I wouldn't like them.
Probably not. I mean, you'd like the first minute of the song. It's very intriguing until it kind of falls apart. And the next song, it slows things down a bit, but that's about it. The vocals are more appealing here because it's slower and he's not trying to be aggressive, I guess, is what he was doing on the first one. But it's kind of a sad song, but also kind of a boring song. And not a lot to say about that. So the next one is the most interesting on the album, I thought. It's a song that everybody would recognize, just not this version. It is Roll Over Beethoven. It starts with a surprisingly faithful performance of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony before moving on to the cover of the Chuck Berry classic. And the Chuck Berry guitar is very good. It's iconic. Everyone knows it. But here they just amp it up. There's a lot more flourishes going on. They're just doing a whole lot more with the same stuff. And the bass line has been completely redone. It is now the Peter Gunn theme, or Spy Hunter if you prefer, if you're more into the arcade games. But that bass line with Roll Over Beethoven on top of it is kind of the core of this song. But then they have these huge solos / instrumentals going in the middle with even more interpretations of Beethoven sprinkled in there. And it's what made it interesting was you're kind of always waiting to see, well, what type of weird thing is going to happen next? Because if you're familiar with all these different parts, it's really hard not to have a good time because it just kind of flows so well. It's surprising that the Chuck Berry version didn't do this almost. After you hear this version, it's like, wow, that was impressive. So that was probably the best part of the album. Then it goes into the fourth song, kind of David Bowie sounding thing. This one is the only other song that had Roy Wood still on it. He's doing bass this time, as far as I can tell. And it's not a huge change in sound or style from what they've been doing. It also kind of feels like a mashup, as far as I can tell, of this European feel almost. Like an Eastern European thing going on. But I think this is kind of a remnant of their original idea for this album, which was called The Lost Planet. It was going to be a concept album, but I think that was more of Roy Wood's thing, and once he left, they kind of dropped the concept part of the album, and this may have just been kind of a piece of that, because it still mentions like rockets and stuff like that. And then the last one is Kiyama, which I think is a girl's name. It is the longest track, over 11 minutes. It's also the longest track that they ever recorded. So it's a lengthy one. And the band members said that this is their personal favorites. And I can see why. It is completely uncommercial. You are not going to make money off of this song. But it had a good melody. There's a story in here that is worthwhile, kind of about a guy who has come home from fighting in a war and is consoling a girl whose parents were killed in that war. And then, spoilers for this song, he admits that he's the one who killed her parents at the end of the song. So it's kind of raw lyrically, but it has a ripping violin solo, which was really fun. And something you don't really hear that often. It wasn't meant to be soothing violin. This is pay attention, angry violin. So that was fun for me. So that's the album. 5 songs, 42 minutes long. And I mean, one last point I want to stress is that this isn't like adding an orchestra or symphony or whatever to a standard rock song. I enjoy that when it's done well, like Metallica or the Scorpions songs that you are already familiar with, and then they spruce them up with orchestrations. This is not that. These songs were written with the orchestrations in mind, and they're so tightly knit into the songs and not just an orchestra playing along with a band. I mean, if you took them out, it would not be a song anymore. It would be unrecognizable. Whereas if you take the symphony out of Metallica, you still have Metallica. So overall, that's basically this album. I hope I didn't talk too much about it.
No, no. So, first of all, you know me. You know what kind of stuff I like, and you know that I really like ELO's later stuff. So, would you say that I should listen to this one?
Not the whole album, no. There are hints of things to come, but unless you're a really big ELO fan and you really want to know how they became the band that you enjoy, I would probably just listen to those 2 tracks. The third one, Roll Over Beethoven and Kiyama. And I mean, that's going to take you 20 minutes anyway, so.
That's a good, half an album right there.
Yeah.
So, what kind of rating did you give it, star-wise?
Well, my gut went immediately to a 3. Because it's solid, but not the vocals. Those vocals are not solid. They were hit or miss on that. And like I said, it may be a recording issue, but he's the producer on these as well, so you can't lay it off on somebody else when you wrote, produced, and sang it all yourself. That's on you. But the originality that is in here, where that pop and orchestration is so linked, that's different. And so I think I would land at a 3.5 just for that originality, that they were going for something that I haven't really heard in the same way.
All right then, 3.5 it is. And I did look up while Luke was talking. This album came out on March 2nd, 1973. Those first few days of March were really packed with albums, but all of March and April, really. So we are going to have Luke joining us for the next few weeks at least, so he will be back. We hope to have all 3 of us, together to talk about some of these albums in the future, but it didn't work out this week. It was kind of a crazy week, but I think I say that every week. They all are. So, Luke, do you have anything else to add?
Nope. Looking forward to coming back and doing this again.
All right. Well, guys, we are going to take a quick break, and then my brother and I will be back with a few more albums to talk about. So, hang on with us just for a minute.
And we're back. I haven't had a chance to check out most of that ELO 2 yet. I did listen to Roll Over Beethoven, and I think the first track, obviously. But I was just so infatuated and intrigued by the next album that we're going to talk about. But I think you had a few more comments to add to ELO 2, so I'm going to step aside before we talk about the next album.
Yeah, just briefly. I've listened to a little bit of the album now, after he reviewed it. I would probably agree with his rating. I don't know, I haven't listened to the whole thing, but I did want to mention I didn't realize that ELO was formed from former members of The Move. So that was really interesting to me. I'm pretty sure we reviewed some of their stuff earlier on, so yeah.
Like 3 albums, I believe. Yeah. The Move is one of my underrated bands from early 70s. Like those 3 albums were amazing. I like them. They're still in my playlist.
So yeah, there you go. I didn't realize that those 2 bands were the same people. So, way to go. Not to give too much credit to him. He's my husband. I can't let him get a big head. But I am glad to know that. That just adds another layer of interest to it. But that's all I've got on that one. I'm ready to move on to the next thing.
All right. Well, the next album, I'm more anxious to hear what you have to say about it, compared to what I have to actually say about it. Now, I was already familiar, and I think we already had a couple albums from the artists we're getting ready to talk about. I don't know if you had one or the other one, but either way, we're familiar with Todd Rundgren. We already had Runt, and then I think it's Runt, A Tale of Todd Rundgren, or something like that. It's like they're two albums almost the same, the first two albums. And those albums were more of like an classic, like an R&B type. Todd Rundgren can do so many things that, from what I remember, they were more like a standard singer-songwriter type stuff. I think Todd Rundgren starts getting compared to Carole King. He's the male Carole King, and we didn't listen to. I've already listened to the album before the one we're getting ready to discuss, and that is Something Anything, and it's full of like I said, R&B and just totally totally different than what we're getting ready to talk about. Well, like I said, Todd Rundgren got tired of being compared to a lot of these other artists. He's a musical genius. He didn't want to be the male Carole King. He didn't want to be the next anyone. He wanted to be the first Todd Rundgren, the only Todd Rundgren. And this is his fourth album, A Wizard, A True Star. One of the most interesting album covers that we've had this year. I'm going to go ahead and say that. If you see, I don't know if the vinyl itself, I assume, but I know the CD itself is die cut, so it's not a square, which is already different. And the artwork is really psychedelic. It has Todd, his face with two ears, not on one side of his head. His ear is doubled up, so something's already up. Well, okay, A Wizard, A True Star is an example of an artist having complete and total control of what he's putting out. Todd Rundgren made his money mostly as a producer, producing other people. So he already had the money to fund A Wizard, A True Star himself. So he didn't have anyone to answer to. So, the direction of this album is completely from Todd Rundgren's head. His words. And at the time as well, Todd Rundgren had been experimenting heavily with some substances. And from what I found, let me see here, DMT, Ritalin, peyote, and mushrooms, and LSD, I assume. So he was quite the psychonaut, and you can tell from this album. If I were to compare this to anything, it's going to sound bad when I try to compare it to anything, to this, but I mean it in a good way. This is like Mothers of Invention or Frank Zappa, where it's just like some free-flowing, whatever he wants to do. Whatever he wants to do, he's going to do it. I'm really anxious to hear what you say about this album, because I know you have misophonia, and there are times in this album that are intentional. They're intentionally recorded and produced this way to evoke certain emotions, to take you on a ride. Dogfight Giggle may be one of those. I'm not going to go track by track. I will say one thing. This vinyl was long. The songs are I guess songs, and everything flows into one another. You don't really know, most of the things are a minute and, and a half or so. So, he's just flowing from one thing into another. And this is probably the result of being on psychedelics or whatever, and Ritalin. So so you can tell, you can almost take this trip with Todd as he's going on it. I thought it was funny. International Feel starts out almost as a Baroque style pop, almost like that British Burt Bacharach. I think there were some influence. I think Burt Bacharach had a little bit of influence on Todd Rundgren. I don't know. I've never seen that, but some of these numbers like this, they evoke, like, it sounds like a little bit of that Burt Bacharach stuff. So, but like I said, International Feel, it's like that pop kind of stuff. And then he goes into Never Never Land, which is Peter Pan. I thought that was kind of funny. I like the synthesizer in Tick Tick Tick. It wears off. He's got a little like this album is, I don't even think I mentioned personnel. It's Todd. It's pretty much Todd Rundgren. He plays all the instruments. He does have some help with keyboards a little bit and some cello. You have Todd Rundgren. I'm just gonna say vocals, guitar, keyboards, synthesizers, bass guitar, drums, percussion, saxophone, electronic effects, and production. And then you have Moogie and the Rhythm Kings with his backing band. And I mean, Mark Moogie Klingman's on keyboards, Ralph Schuckett on keyboards as well, John Siegler bass guitar and cello, and then John Simos on drums. And there are a couple other interesting. I thought Rick Derringer on guitar was pretty cool. I don't know which song on all these tracks some of these artists are. I keep saying I'm not going to go track by track. I try to keep it PG on here. We're going to say cat after the one word. It's not part of the album. Just in case I don't want to get flagged by any YouTube, because we're on YouTube now too. If you haven't, I haven't mentioned that. I'll mention that in a minute. You have Rock and Roll Pussy, cat, minus the cat. And that song was written about John Lennon. I didn't know if you knew that. Todd Rundgren wrote that about John Lennon, so I thought that was pretty funny. I think Zen Archer is a minor hit off this album. There were no singles off this album, but I think a lot of people that are Rundgren fans, they like Zen Archer, and it's more of a standard song. It's 5.5 minutes long, so it's more of a prog thing. It's pretty good. I liked it. I think when you get more into side, like when you start hitting after the Dogfight Giggle, maybe. Dogfight Giggle I didn't mention. It's a bunch of loop backmasked tape sounds. That's what I'm interested to hear what you have to say about that. I'm not going to ruin that. You may want to skip that one. You couldn't skip that one on the vinyl, but I thought that was pretty. There was a reason for it. So it does evoke some weird psychedelic imagery. But anyway, I'm going to keep going. I don't want to. We spoke too long on Pink Floyd, so I don't want to stay too long at this album. But this album is it's the work of a true genius on drugs. That's all I'm going to say. I think When the Shit Hits the Fan, Sunset Boulevard, I think that's the guitar that Rick Derringer plays in, because there's a guitar part in that that's pretty heavy rock centric, and it could have been Todd, but I think that is probably Rick Derringer.
That's the song title, everybody. He's not just making a statement about the album.
Yeah. No, yeah, y'all, there's so many. Like I said, I'm not gonna go track by track. I really like the medley of R&B songs that just happened, like just right in the middle of, I'm So Proud from Curtis Mayfield, and Ooh Baby Baby, Smokey Robinson, and La La Means I Love You, and the Cool Jerk. I mean, he just flows right through it and just kills it. Just like some amazing R&B. You're like, man, this guy, what can this guy not do? And I can't remember which track it was. There is one part where the vocals there's so much gain on it and everything. It has that garage band sound. It almost sounds like a Jack White type thing. Some white stripes when he really overdrives the vocals. So I'm pretty sure Jack White's probably influenced. He probably really is like Todd Rundgren. So, because I mean, Todd did that at other times in this album as well, but I just really noticed, and I wish I had made that note of the song in particular. But there's just so many things, this album is all over the place, but in a good way almost, because it was intentional. Normally I wouldn't, I would probably give negative points for an album for being a little bit sporadic and everything, but that's the point of this album. I don't really have anything much more to add. This thing did chart at 86, and it lost Todd Rundgren about half of his fan base at the time, because they expected the R&B, the more pop, the radio friendly type stuff, and then they got this, and they're like, what in the world? But I'm going to try to get a copy of this on vinyl, because I'm really intrigued by this. And the first time I listened to it, I didn't love it. The second time I listened to it, I started being like, you know what? Okay, I can get down with this thing. This is pretty good. And I've listened to this album, and it's long. Like I said, it's like 55 minutes and 56 seconds. On a 60-minute vinyl, that would have been impressive at the time anyway. I think the quality wasn't as good either, so he told people to turn the volume up a little bit, because he had to shove so much, on there. But this album, I'm not going to give my star rating yet, but I actually really like it now. It's taken a little bit of time, but I went back and I listened to it in, like I said, there are times that in headphones it's not good, because like the dogs barking part and all that. That one is jarring in some headphones. But there are other times the production on this is so exquisite, and I probably listened to a remastered copy, I'm sure, because this was on Spotify. But the production on this is so amazing. Yet it's busy at times, but you still hear everything. Like, everything stands out separately, and it does come together at times. And for you it might be too busy, but for me it's all right. So, but I'm used to listening to Mothers of Invention and some of this Frank Zappa stuff. I will say this: if you're looking to get into Todd Rundgren himself, you may want to not start with this album. This probably doesn't want to be, you don't want this to be the first album that you try to tackle from Todd, unless you're a fan of an artist, doing what he wants to do, an artist in complete control of his own creativity. And when I started thinking in those terms, that's when I started liking this album a little bit more, and my stars went up. I actually went up a whole star, I'll say that. But I'm going to turn it over to you, Cincy, because I'm really anxious to hear what you have to say about A Wizard, a True Star. What do you think about it?
I'm not super familiar with Todd Rundgren. I do know some songs, and we did have the Runt album. I think I might have only had one. One of them might have been one of your solo ones. I can't remember for sure. It's been too long. But yeah, I did already know very well a couple of songs. I never really realized that they were by Todd Rundgren until pretty recently, even though they are songs that I've known for a long time. Hello, It's Me, and I Saw the Light. I do really like those songs. We missed reviewing those. They're from 1972, so they are victims of our hiatus, but they are from that 1972 album that you mentioned. So I was pretty interested in listening to this. And no, it's not the same as those songs. It's not nearly as poppy. It's a little more artsy, more psychedelic is what I wrote down, and then after I listened and started doing my research, it turns out that is exactly the right descriptor, because he was experimenting with psychedelic drugs when he recorded this, as you mentioned. It shows. But I'm not saying it's bad. It's not. It is sort of frenetic. There's a lot of really short tracks on here, so it does kind of jump around a lot. Like, what I wrote down is it's kind of like listening to one of Weird Al's style polkas, like alternative polka. It's fast and hyper, and you get just a little bit of one song, and then it quickly switches to the next. I love Weird Al, and I love those, alternative polka, angry white boy polka. I was just surprised by that kind of quick change on this album. I wasn't expecting that. Actually, one song, Zen Archer, it even has an accordion-like song in it, and it came right after I was writing my notes about Weird Al, so that kind of freaked me out a little. But that was actually a little more calm and traditional. It's a slower-paced song, and it's 5.5 minutes long. But there are 12 tracks on the first side of the album, in less than 30 minutes, 26 something. So that should help give you an idea of the pacing that we are talking about. There are a few longer ones, Zen Archer, like I mentioned, and then there was another one that was 4 minutes long. And then the other 10 tracks are a combined 17 minutes or so. It felt a little aimless in ways. Like, it did flow together in that there were no pauses between the songs, but every song was different. It wasn't that they were flowing together to make one seamless thing. It's kind of funny that, as you mentioned, he was on Ritalin, because Luke and I both thought it's a little ADD. It's kind of like a stream of consciousness type of thing. And with a brain like mine, I don't have ADD or ADHD, but I do have trouble focusing sometimes. My brain tends to jump around for a while, and then it'll find something that it focuses hard on for a little bit, and then it gets restless again, and it can be exhausting. But I feel like that's kind of what was going on here, and maybe it was due to some of the drugs he was on. But it's kind of a stream of consciousness type of thing. It's just whatever he thought of, that's what he put down. Side 2 wasn't as chaotic as Side 1. There were still 7 tracks in 30 minutes, and one of those was the 10.5-minute long medley. But there were also about half the songs that were in that more normal 4 to 5 minute range. So it had a little more, I don't want to say traditionalism, but a little less chaotic. Okay, so I've talked at length about the length, or lack thereof, about the tracks. As for the content, Side 1, it wasn't really my thing, but I don't want this to come across as though I'm against experimentation or changing direction, especially if it's based on an authentic desire to go in a different direction, and I think that is the case here. I don't think that the earlier super poppy stuff is what was going to make Todd Rundgren happy, so I applaud his decision to try something else that felt more real to him. I respect that. And he wasn't concerned about making money on it. It is because he already had a lot of money from his production work, but I respect him for setting that aside and being true to himself. That is awesome. It was a little too chaotic for me. It didn't really trigger my misophonia as much. Even Dogfight Giggle, you might think that it would, but it wasn't that bad. Maybe it's because it was so short. But it didn't really bother me. It's just, it was a little hard to keep up with. And in general, even though I don't always like the really long songs, I also don't really care for super short ones because they can feel unsatisfying to me. Like, I'm just getting into it and then it's already over. There's a sweet spot in the middle, and most of these tracks didn't quite get there. Some of them just didn't appeal to me, but others may have if I'd had more of a chance to enjoy them. They were over just a little bit too quickly for that, though. But, that's okay. That's just my personal enjoyment, and I will mention, even though he's not reviewing this one, Luke mentioned that was actually really inspirational to him, because he comes up with song ideas in his head, and he doesn't always do anything with them because he knows that there's not enough there to make a full song. It's just a minute or a minute and a half of music, maybe one verse and a chorus, and that's all there is. So it was really nice for him to see someone like Todd Rundgren say, hey, that's okay. You don't have to have more than that. You can go with just that. So he really liked it for that. It was a little frustrating for me. I felt like I couldn't get into anything. Side 2 was better, though. It had more of the soul influence, maybe even a little more easy listening also. Not just the medley, although that one obviously relied heavily on soul music. It's literally a medley of 4 soul and R&B classics. Like you said, Curtis Mayfield, the Miracles, the Delphonics, and the Capitals are all represented. Who doesn't like Ooh Baby Baby or Cool Jerk? One caveat, I do sometimes dislike medleys as well, for the same reason that I dislike short songs, just because I want more. In a way, it's a compliment to the artist. It's like, I wanted more of that, don't stop so quickly. And I don't want these great songs to be cut short. That said, or having said that, this one wasn't bad. It's almost a complete departure from side 1, where everything was really short. On this one, each of the individual songs that he included in that medley got pretty good representation. They didn't feel overly shortened. I actually think he included the whole song for at least some of those 4. For me, that was the best track on the album. It's not just because of the genre or style, although I am admittedly predisposed to enjoy those songs. I just think he sounded great on that one. He did a really good job on that medley. Cool Jerk wasn't as pretty or as nice sounding, but it's not a pretty song anyway. It's a fun song, and he was playing around with it and having fun. I will say, if I'm looking for things and really being critical, I did have to turn up the volume on that medley a little bit. It was a little bit quieter than the other tracks on Spotify, but that's a minor complaint. I had to mention it because I was looking for specific things to point out. I also thought that the last track on the album, Just One Victory, that one highlighted his voice a little bit more. It was more in the style of his 1972 music, so maybe he might not have enjoyed it as much, but you could hear his singing better, and I like his voice, so I enjoyed that as well. And I did also want to give some quick credit, because he did almost everything on the album, as you said. That's really impressive. There were a few other musicians, Rick Derringer, and then the saxophone players and such, but most of it was just Todd Rundgren. Instruments, the writing, the production, all him. So that's impressive. I give him props for that. I'll go ahead and finish off my review. I didn't find anything specific on the album that I want to save, so in a way it's a little disappointing because I really like some of his stuff from just 1 year prior, but I get it. And this wasn't bad. I don't want it to sound like I'm just totally slamming him. It wasn't as much to my taste as some other stuff. Some songs weren't my favorite, but there were a couple that were good. None of it was bad. And he is still a really talented musician. So I don't want it to sound like I'm slamming him or like I don't like him. I did give this one, for me, 3.5 stars. I don't know if I enjoyed it 3.5 stars worth. I think that side 2 would be like 3.5, and side 1 would be closer to a 3 for me. Side 2 elevates it, and since we don't give quarter stars, I gave it 3.5, but I feel like you might rate it a little higher, so I'm interested to hear what you ended up giving it.
Well, I knew your rating would be wrong, so I knew
It's
I'd
not
have to fix
wrong.
it. So.
It's subjective.
Yep. But this is 4.5 stars. So combined, it makes it a 4, which is okay with that. I'm okay with that. But yeah, I understand. Yeah, I can see, the short songs and stuff like that. But you also have never experimented with psychedelics, so you can't bring that for the table as well.
You say that like it's a bad thing.
Those that I have, it could be. Some might think that, but it evokes certain imagery and things. If you have ever, like, just from the people that I've spoken with, because I have friends that are psychonauts, and when they've spoken with me, when I've spoken to them, maybe not someone I'm going to talk about in a minute. I don't want to cast aspersions on him. I don't think he's a psychonaut, but some of the other psychonauts that I have talked to, they can correlate this album to that experience pretty seamlessly with Pink Floyd as well.
No, I
So,
absolutely get that, and
yeah.
I respect it. I just, like I said, I wanted more.
Well, it's funny that I mentioned the not wanting to cast aspersions, because when we started part of the podcast, the whole inspiration was, I was talking to a friend of mine, Rick Morgan, and I asked for some artists from the 70s for another podcast that I was doing called Rants and Random Ramblings, because we wanted to just do a podcast about 70s music. It was all kinds of stuff. That thing's still on Spotify or Anchor or something somewhere. If you want to go look for that, that's a deep cut. But that's when I first discovered Todd Rundgren, as well as a few of these other bands that we have been talking about that I didn't know about it before, like Trapeze and those kind of bands like that. So but Todd Rundgren, yeah, like I was pleasantly surprised to learn about him. And Rick came on the podcast, Chord Chronicles podcast, I believe. I thought you were with us, but it may have just been the two of us to talk about one of the first two Todd Rundgren, Runt albums, and I can't remember which of the two, but he did come on and talk with us about that. So I thought it would only be appropriate that we would have him back on 100th episode to maybe speak a little bit more touch on this album and just about his love of Todd, because Todd Rundgren is one of his favorite artists. So I think we're going to take a quick break, and when we get back, I'm going to see what Rick has to say.
Hey, everybody out there in podcast listening land / music lover land. This is Ricky Morgan, and got a few shows that I come from. I've got the Hail Ming Power Hour and a solo show that I'm doing called Dr. Movie, but I don't really have an outlet to talk about music, and I was asked by my good friend Jeff, who is the creator of this show you're listening to spout off a little bit about one of my favorite musicians on the planet, which is Todd Rundgren, that I know that this episode we're talking about A Wizard, a True Star. So to give you a little background, my love for Todd goes back to the 90s, believe it or not. I don't really even go back further than that. I mean, I knew a couple of songs growing up. I heard, Hello, It's Me on the radio as a kid. Who doesn't remember Bang the Drum All Day in commercials and, hearing it on the radio. But in the 90s, VH1 came out and started showing, old videos and stuff, and there was a video for Todd Rundgren playing Hello, It's Me live. And it made me very curious of if I like this and I like the presentation. I thought, everything was cool with it, so you dig into it, right? Well, I started off on a safe bet, right? Because you're like, okay, what other popular songs does this guy have? So I bought the anthology, and instantly just was like blown away by just this category of music. And this is his basically greatest hits from, the beginning all the way to getting into the late 80s stuff, right? Because again, this was the 90s. And that, again, makes you go back and start digging, right? So if I like these 2 or 3 songs and I know they came off of this album, what's the next thing, right? So obviously the next choice was Something Anything, which was his most successful album. And the thing about that is, Todd lives the dream, right? He makes a living producing and directing other musicians. That's where he makes his money. So his solo career or music career, he can do whatever he wants. He doesn't have the pressure of a record company saying, you have to have a hit, we've got to do these songs. You're not being forced to do songs you don't want to do, like in the case of many rock bands. Whenever a label doesn't hear something they think is a hit, so they force you to do a remake of something. Todd had total freedom to do whatever he wanted. And ironically, whatever he wanted was, at first to be successful. So his first 3 albums are all laced with pop hits, heavily influenced, by his earlier influences, a lot of Motown, things like that. And when Something Anything came out, it was right at the same time that Carole King's Tapestry came out, which is, one of the most successful singer-songwriter albums ever, if not the most successful. But everybody started comparing Todd to her. And he didn't like that. He doesn't like to be compared to anybody. So what do? Well, you totally try to wreck that, right? You want to get as far away from that as possible. Which brings us to today's album we're talking about, A Wizard, a True Star from 73. Let's just say that drugs played a large part in the creation of this album. He wanted to get so far away from the pop formula. And there's still some poppy songs on here, but the incredible thing about this, and other bands started taking with this as well. I mean, the Beatles is kind of known for it, but it was kind of pieced together afterwards to make it happen. But this album really doesn't have a beginning or an end, and there is no breaks in the tracks. The song doesn't fade out and you go to the next song. It is literally out of one song into the other, the entire album. If you try to drop the needle, if you got a record player, to catch a track, you really can't do it because there's no blank spaces. The songs literally just meld into it, almost like a long two-sided LP medley. And, that's something he wanted to do, and, some of the song arrangements are just so bizarre and over the top. A lot of instrumentals, and just really experimenting with sounds, which is the thing people always talk about with Todd is he was always on the cutting edge of sounds and technology, right? Because he knew how to manipulate things in the studio that other people did not. Which brings me to a song that's on here. Was it Dog Fight Giggle, right? Which is, it starts off, it sounds like, people laughing, and it turns into, it starts off with a dog, and it sounds like some dogs, well, like it says, it sounds like dogs getting into a fight. Then all of a sudden it warps into high pitch, high speed, and then it turns into, sounds like laughing, and it's all tape manipulation. And, but then it bleeds into him doing some studio magic of recording himself doing a bunch of laughs and reversing those. It's quite unusual, and to call it a song is, not really going to happen. So let's do a rundown here. International Feel, the first song on the track. International Feel sets you up for the rest of the album, and he even says it at the beginning. It was a note to all of his fans, which he lost probably half of his fan base with this album. But it even says, I only want to see if you'll give up on me. He was literally talking to the fans. Do you respect me as an artist, or do you just like pop songs? Never Never Land, right? The song from Peter Pan is the next track, so it just bleeds right into it with this, I know, I know, I know, I know. And again, just amazing. Every song, I'm looking across there, there's one 5.5-minute song, there's one 4-minute song, and then everything else is like 1 minute and 14 seconds. That's the kind of album you've got here, right? Tick, 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 It Wears Off is number 3 track. And again, you're getting into using the technology of the time with synthesizers and things like that. You Need Your Head is kind of an off-time, odd-time signature, heavily fuzzed, distorted rock tune. Rock and Roll Pussy, right after that. Again, another jammer. Then it goes to the Dogfight Giggle I talked about earlier. You Don't Have to Camp Around. Kind of gets you back to the old style of Todd, but with strange subject matter, right? Then you've got Flamingo, which is 2.5 minutes long. Instrumental, synthesizers, odd sounds, and it goes right into my favorite track on this album, which is Zen Archer. It's a longer song, brilliant tune, Then goes right out of that to Just Another Onion Head and Da Da Dolly. Bizarre song, right? It's almost a show tune to a certain degree. Well, Da Da Dolly is. It's, from a musical. When the Shit Hits Fan and Sunset Boulevard is another rocker. And then you get a reprise with La Fille Internationale, which kind of is the wraparound of the album. So, again, he wanted the process of it being a non-ending album. It didn't do well when this album came out, but eventually the diehard fans, such as myself, really consider it his best work, even though the quality and fidelity of this album is nowhere near what Something Anything was, because I don't know that he necessarily recorded all this in the studio. I think he might have just strung up a microphone in a garage and did some of this stuff. I mean, it really sounds gritty in some parts and then beautiful on other ends, but it's just a unique album. A few years back, he actually went out and did this album in entirety, and I'm thinking, how does a band pull this off? Because you were literally changing sounds every minute and a half on your instrument or whatever you're doing, and just being able to play these and make them transition like the record, that's a task all in itself. So I can go on and on and on about Todd's career, but I just kind of wanted to hit this album as one of the most influential albums. Even though it was hated when it came out, everybody regards this very highly as a benchmark of being able to make something more than just a record full of tunes, right? Which is, ironically, a song that's on the next album, an LP's worth of tunes, right? Just amazing artist. It's not for everybody. Matter of fact, I got a lot of friends that call him Todd Rundgren, right? Because he just doesn't write normal songs. But again, he's living the dream. He's doing what every musician wants to do and have total, freedom to create whatever he wants, whenever he wants. And I don't know, I really like that. And there's stuff that he does that really just hits me in the feels, man. Just great stuff. So do yourself a favor, throw you some headphones on, and realize that you're about to take a drug-tastic trip listening to this album and just how this was all put together. You really have to remember, this is one guy. He pretty much played and performed and recorded, produced this album by himself. So there you go, folks. The amazing Todd Rundgren. We will check you later. I'm sure I'll get invited for some other stuff. But till then, folks, we will check you later.
Alright, I am back, everybody, and I am actually all alone this week. It's been a while since I have been alone to record a segment, but I think I can handle it. Let's hope so, anyway. We're going to find out. This is going to be a long episode already, I know, so I'm going to try to be kind of quick getting through this, but we'll see. I can be pretty talkative sometimes, so I make no promises. My solo album this week was MFSB, their self-titled album. That stands for Mother, Father, Sister, Brother. So, yeah, I knew that it was going to be instrumental, which can be difficult for me sometimes since I am very lyric focused. But I was still looking forward to this. MFSB was the house band for Philadelphia International Records, which was the home of a ton of popular soul acts from the 70s, and these musicians played on more albums than I can list here as session musicians for that studio. You may have heard of Gamble and Huff. I know we've talked about them a lot. They basically created that Philly sound that was made popular by the OJs and the Spinners and so many other great Philadelphia soul acts. Well, Gamble and Huff owned Philadelphia International Records, and they assembled this group of session players as MFSB, mother, father, sister, brother, like I said, to back up those other artists. And I already knew the Sound of Philadelphia, TSOP, better known as the Soul Train theme song. That is MFSB. That's not on this album, but it's the same group. So I was excited. Instrumental doesn't mean bad, it just means that I and people like me who are so lyric focused may have to work a little bit harder to maintain focus on what we're hearing. But I knew that this was probably going to be good. Good, funky soul. And it is. First of all, I forgot to mention earlier, this came out on March 3rd. So it is our latest album of the week, but everything that we had this week came out, pretty close together, just a few days. It was a packed week. A lot of the songs on this album are just instrumental versions of songs that were made popular by other artists. It's hard to say. I don't mean that as criticism. Covers are fine. And this is the house band for the record company, after all. A lot of the same musicians played on at least one of the originals that I'm talking about, so it's kind of questionable to even say that's a cover. Also, the songs that I'm referring to, there are 3 out of the 6 tracks that are on the album. They are mostly songs that we missed during our hiatus last year. Actually, I think we missed all of those 3. So it is kind of nice to get to review those songs, even if they aren't the originals. They're pretty big songs. The album kicks off with Freddy's Dead, originally from Curtis Mayfield's Superfly. That was a 1972 album. We missed it, but it is a huge album. And a good song, too. Then you have Family Affair, originally by Sly and the Family Stone. I love that song. That's great. As far as I can tell, none of the MFSB musicians played on the original of either Family Affair or Freddy's Dead. Those were on different labels. But both of the songs are good. The originals and the covers, too. The covers are not as good as the originals that are most popular and well known, but they are still good. And then the final cover on MFSB's self-titled album is Backstabbers. It's originally by the OJs, and that one did feature several of the same musicians, because the OJs were a Philadelphia International act. So I think that one sounds pretty similar, just without the vocals on it. It is kind of hard for me to compare a song with vocals to one without, even when it's a song like that I know very well. But I was able to sing along with this, karaoke style. I didn't get tripped up by unfamiliar parts or different timing. It sounded right to me in a way that a lot of covers just don't. They smiling in your face all the time, they want to take your place. The Backstabbers. Great song, good cover. There were also 3 other tracks that were originals, including one written by Leon Huff of Gamble and Huff, and another by Kenneth Gamble and Tom Bell, who is hugely influential as a songwriter and producer. I'm not going to talk too much about him, because we're going to talk more about him a little later this year, but he wrote some really good stuff. I promise you will almost certainly know his songs. And, sadly, he just died at the end of last year. But those original tracks were good too. They may not be playlist quality for me, but I am very picky with my playlist. I tend to go for things that really get me excited, up and moving and dancing and singing. So it's hard to secure one of those spots, especially for instrumentals. Layin' Low, the song that was written by Leon Huff, I think was the best of the 3 originals, but they were all good. I mean, if you like 70s soul music and you don't have trouble focusing on instrumental music, you're gonna like this. You're not gonna be disappointed. These are talented artists. I do still prefer the versions of the songs with words for the ones that are covers. It's not even necessarily because of the vocals, but it's just because those are the ones that I know, and familiarity goes a long way. You know, these tracks just aren't going to replace any of those. It's not that they are bad. I don't know, maybe they're even just as good, but they're not as familiar, so they're not going to replace any of those originals. But I definitely didn't mind these either. Not at all. I don't really have a lot else to say other than my score, because there were only 6 tracks and they're all instrumental and 3 of them are covers. I debated on what score to give the album, because I didn't find anything that earned a permanent spot in my playlist or in my memory, if I'm honest, but I feel like it's good. I was between 2 stars that were just a half star apart. I did ultimately go with the lower of the 2, but that's mainly because half of the album is covers. They're good covers, but you know, for me, they don't replace the originals, so I didn't feel right about bumping the score up too high. I mean, this probably is not better than the albums that those songs were originally on. You know, and I didn't get to listen to those, but I'm guessing that they probably would have been 4-star albums, maybe higher, but I don't know. And I feel like this one by MFSB still needs to be slightly lower than that, but not much lower. So I gave this 3.5 stars, you know, and it's still a pretty strong album. Like I said, if you like 70s soul, check it out. It is good. And I'm really looking forward to their next release, which also came out in 1973, so we're going to get to talk about that one later this year. So, that is MFSB, their self-titled album. Mother, Father, Sister, Brother. And we will be hearing more from them later in the year, but we do have one other album to talk about this week, once we come back together. So, I'm excited about that one. So hang on just a second for us, and we're going to come back together and talk about our last album of the week.
All right. You know, I haven't had a chance to listen to your Amy's All Alone album yet. You know, Mother, Father, Sister, Brother. Mm-hmm. Not the other for those dirty-minded people out there.
Like you.
But I am. Oh yeah, of course. But I am anxious. I want to check it out because I don't even know what it would. Is it a like a jazz, something like that, or what is it?
It's for kind of jazzy, kind of funky orchestra.
Okay. Well, you know, I'm really anxious. I'm going to try to give it just a listen through today, you know, because I'm hoping it's something I can put in the headphones and, you know, while I'm working, just to have as, you know, maybe to keep me going. So I'm anxious to check it out because I've never listened to Mother, Father, Sister, and Brother. So it'll be my first exposure to them. So yeah, I'm really anxious to check them out. And, you know, the final band that we have to talk about this week is a band that the both of us are already familiar with, I'm sure. I'm already really familiar with them. And I was, you know, pleasantly surprised to find 2 of the songs I already knew. Maybe 3, you know. But there were 2 definite songs from the first glance that I was already really familiar with. This album came out March the 2nd of 1973. And I think we went out of order for your Alone segment. We usually try to go in order. Though. I think your album you just talked about came out the 3rd, and this came out the 2nd, but, you know, we like to keep things balanced here. So, but this is the Doobie Brothers, The Captain and Me. And, I mean, you know, this is their third studio album. I don't remember reviewing any Doobie Brothers, and I know we did miss out from the hiatus from 72. So maybe that little bit of 71 that we missed out, maybe we've missed the first two Doobie Brothers albums. So now I'm ashamed. So I'm definitely I'm definitely going to have to go back and check out those first two albums, because if it's any indication of, I mean, there was probably a growth in the band from, the first album to now. We'll see, but I am really excited to check out more stuff from the Doobie Brothers, other than this album, because this album was a huge pleasant surprise. Now, like I said, we're already familiar with two of the songs on this album, the two singles, Long Train Running, and the B-side to that was Without You, and then China Grove. The B-side to that was Evil Woman. What a double record right there. My goodness. I didn't there were quite a few of these songs on here that I haven't heard before. This is like a good fusion between rock with your electric guitar, but you also have the acoustic and almost a country-ish vibe, but not overly country. Not heavy on the country to where I just wouldn't like it, because I'm just not the biggest fan of country. I mean, some fans, there are lots of country fans out there, and you're more than welcome to listen to it, so I don't have to.
I'm one of them.
But yeah, I like some country, and like I said, this country right here, this is the kind of country that's accessible to a wide audience. It has a little bit of the country soul and feel to it, without being just too heavy, and it doesn't have that fake, the fake twang. There's no twang in this, not really. It just has the acoustic guitar, so it has that. It has a little bit of that vibe. The Doobie Brothers were named, as you might guess, by their love of weed. I guess they were smoking, because I was like, well, maybe they were, they were just making doobies, like little jams all the time, and that's all it is, and we're just making something that, out of it that's not. No, they liked weed. So they're just a couple country boys making good music, like in the Devil's Lettuce. So more power to them, I guess. I'm gonna run through the personnel for the Doobie Brothers real fast, because I honestly didn't know who the Doobie Brothers were individually. My ignorance. But you have Tom Johnston. He plays acoustic and electric guitars, harmonica on Long Train Running, ARP synthesizer, and does lead and backing vocals. You have Patrick Simmons. He plays acoustic and electric, ARP synthesizer, and banjo on The Captain and Me, and lead and backing vocals. Tyron Porter, bass and backing vocals. I think he is severely underrated. Like in this album, I don't know if it's, because it's a new mix, or I'm sure this is remastered, but I thought the bass guitar comes through at times. And I thought, I don't know. I've never heard anything mentioned about his name being mentioned before, but I was pleased with his work on this album. Then you have John Hartman on drums and percussion, backing vocals as well. The harmonies on this album are great. I'm going to say that. And then finally, I did mention Michael Hossack on drums, congas, and timbales. So there's a lot of percussion on this. There are additional players on this album. I'm not going to run through it. Only one I noticed that I do recognize, you have Bill Payne, and he's he helped band with Little Feat, with Lowell George. He helped found Little Feat. So you have Bill Payne plays piano on China Grove, and organ on a couple tracks, electric piano. He's pretty prevalent throughout the album. So I didn't realize he was involved with the Doobie Brothers, the Little Feat. It's all connected. We keep coming up with these, like a lot of these guys. I'm sure recording out of the same studios, or these producers, they produce for different bands, so they're like, we need to get these guys together, because look at this way this guy plays piano. It would fit with what I'm trying to get with this. So I think that probably played a huge hand in a lot of these bands interchanging, having additional members just show up sometimes. But I'm not going to go track by track, because we went long on this episode. If everyone has stuck with us this long, I really appreciate it, because this is a big one this week. But I will say, don't just listen to this album for the two singles, Long Train Running and China Grove. There are other great songs on here. I thought Dark Eyed Cajun Woman's good. Clear as the Driven Snow starts out like it's like almost like a ballad country feel to it, and then it goes into some electric guitar. It's just amazing. The guitar on work on this album is just insane. I did not realize how great the Doobie Brothers were, because like this album was a good way to end the week. Evil Woman's an awesome song. I thought Ukiah, which is a town, from what I can tell, that they were really fond of. I think they used to go camping and just stuff like that there. But that's what's that about. And then the title track, The Captain to Me. It's just, I don't really feel like there's anything weak on this album, like we talked about at the beginning of the program. Pink Floyd, it's a totally different vibe. You know, don't get me wrong. Pink Floyd's a totally different vibe than Doobie Brothers. But this Captain and Me, there's not a weak song on it for me. But I don't know. I'm gonna turn it over to you and see what you think about it before I give my stars. I will say, Colin Larkin's all-time top 1,000 albums has severely underrated this album, because they have it listed as 835 out of 1,000. I know there's a lot of good albums. This is if you're gonna of all time, this is closer to 500. I mean, it's not all the way down to 800. Come on now. But anyway, I guess it's all subjective. But I think he's wrong. I think he's really wrong. But yeah, this one is played quite a bit this week. The other members of my household like this, and they don't normally, like, they usually are tortured. Like the Rundgren album, my wife was about to choke me out over here because I played it like 3 times. So, but this album I put on, and she's like, wow, this one's got my toe tapping and everything. You can just play this one. So, as for a wider audience, the Doobie Brothers are probably going to be more accessible. But yeah, The Captain and Me, other than me saying my stars, this was a pleasant surprise. But what did you think about it?
I love the Doobie Brothers. I love some of the songs that are on this album. I mean, even before listening this week for this review, I already loved them. Like you mentioned, Long Train Running and China Grove. Their 1972 album that we missed, Toulouse Street, is really great. There's some really good songs off of that one as well. Well, I don't want to say it's even better than this one, but it's good. I own that one. And their next couple of albums from 1974 and 1975, we haven't gotten to those yet, but I know there are also some really good songs on those as well. So I definitely was not going in blind this time. Not with this one. It is kind of hard to explain their style of music. What the Doobie Brothers do. The Doobie. Yeah.
Doobie Brothers.
I am tempted to call it Southern rock. Like, I always have kind of considered them that.
Yeah, that's what I would consider. I said rock, but it has that country feel to it. So it just maybe Southern rock, but some of the best Southern rock.
Yeah, some of their songs definitely fit that. They sometimes do lean into that swampy Dixieland thing, but not always. And they are. I always assumed that they were just a Southern band. They're not. They're from California. I guess I could liken them to CCR. They're another Cali band that did some Southern-inspired stuff, but also other stuff as well. They don't sound like CCR. John Fogerty's voice is very unique. I guess they really are just kind of classic rock with a little Southern rock influence. That kind of feels like a cop-out, but it really is hard to put a specific label on what the Doobie Brothers do. A lot of the stuff on this album does have that country feel, though. It's maybe not necessarily Southern. That's what we tend to think of when we think of country, because this is where we are from. We're from the Southeast United States. Kind of. Partly Midwestern, partly
Central. Central.
Yeah. But country and Western. They have some country and Western. Long Train Running, that's an example of that. It has a little bit of that country influence. It's a train song. Not Newberry's train song, though. Go check out previous episodes if you don't get that reference. I think it was episode 7. But it has that harmonica that just, it exemplifies train music to me. Like on old movies and TV shows, you'll have people, hobos or whatever, riding the rails, and at night they gather around the fire and talk and eat, and there's always that kind of harmonica music included somewhere. Also with cowboys, but no, it's train music to me. It's a little more on the western side of country and western, but it's still in that genre. And it's a great song. So is China Grove, Whoa-Ho-Ho. The vocals on that one by Tom Johnston, they also definitely have a country tone, a southern type of accent. It doesn't feel faked, though. I complain about that a lot, like you mentioned, the fake twang.
Manufactured twang. But yeah, it's not here.
And the exaggerated country accent. I don't get that. Like I said, I always assumed that the Doobies actually were southern until pretty recently. But they're not. They are mostly West Coast, especially the members of the band at this point. They're Pacific Coasters, California and Washington. The singers were from there, and then I think one was from New Jersey, and one of the guys actually is from Virginia, but that's as far south as they get. But they do that southern style of rock, and they do it well. And there's another song that you mentioned, the Dark-Eyed Cajun Woman. Cajun, that's obviously swampy. And that's a good song too. I liked that one also. I didn't know it before listening to this, but the guitar on that one, that was really good. And another thing that the Doobies really excelled at is harmonizing with each other. That was also highlighted in Dark-Eyed Cajun Woman. So that was a good example of their skills. Clear as the Driven Snow seemed like it used what we usually think of as bluegrass instruments, so definitely some country there too. I think it was actually just guitar, but it had that thumb-picking type of sound, that you hear in bluegrass and more country music. It was written by Patrick Simmons. He played banjo on the title track, so he could play banjo. But there's no banjo or mandolin or anything listed for Clear as the Driven Snow, just the normal Doobies instruments, so I don't know, but it definitely had a bluegrass type of feel to the instrumentation. That said, I know that I have mentioned several songs as being country. They aren't all country. They do show some range on the album, as well as in their repertoire in general. South City Midnight Lady, that one I didn't think was particularly country sounding. I'm gonna say it reminded me of the Eagles, and immediately I'm gonna say, okay, I know, so the Eagles are also country rock a lot of the time. So I'm gonna dial that back a little and clarify. But this is more like the soft rock, not really country Eagles. Yeah. And it does feel kind of funny saying that about that particular song, South City Midnight Lady, because that one actually did use a pedal steel guitar, but it just didn't really scream country to me, oddly enough. Not nearly as much as some of the other songs did. It's a pretty song, though. Really pretty guitar and vocals as well. That was another one that was written and sung by Patrick Simmons, so maybe I just really like him. He and Tom Johnston together handled most of those duties on the album. All the band members had a part in writing the song Without You, and there is one short little instrumental piece, Busted Down Around O'Connelly Corners, that is a cover of a folk song. Every other track was written by either Johnston or Simmons, though, and they split the lead vocal like 65-35, with Johnston doing the larger amount and Simmons doing the rest. And I believe Tom Johnston did the two that we really know, Long Train Running and China Grove, so I don't know, I guess I just really like all the Doobies. Anyway, I have rambled on and focused enough on genres. I don't even like placing those labels on music anyway, because very little fits neatly into one little box, and the Doobies definitely do not. The main point that I want to make is that they are really good. They're talented, they write and they perform great music that is hard to describe easily and succinctly as one style or another. It's just good. And I really did enjoy this album, especially Long Train Running and China Grove, of course. Those are the standout hits for me, but there are several others that I enjoyed as well. I thought it was good in general. It's not a 5-star album for me. For me, it doesn't quite reach the level of Elton John or Marvin Gaye's What's Going On or Dark Side of the Moon, but I did really like it. Obviously, there are some songs that I'm going to listen to again and again and again and again, and I'm going to be singing and dancing along every time. So, even though there is a little bit of filler, it still sounds good, start to finish. There is nothing really that I want to complain about. And it's an album that I wouldn't mind purchasing, and I probably will if I ever come across it in the wild. I really liked it, so while I'm saying it's not a 5-star album, it's really close. For me, The Captain and Me gets 4.5 stars.
And it's funny that you mention it's not a 5-star, because for me it is. And it was hard. Like I wavered back and forth. I was like, do I want to give it a 5-star? Because I've already given them 5-star this week. For Dark Side of the Moon, totally different vibe, like I said. Well, this is a tremendously underrated album. Like, I can't believe that I haven't, listened to the whole thing before. And I will definitely be revisiting this one over and over again. And other Doobie Brothers stuff, I'm going to go back and listen to the 72, the 2 albums before and everything too. Because I'm anxious to hear the progression in sound, or to just see if I get some more good tracks. So yeah, if everyone out there, if you haven't listened to The Captain and Me, from the Doobie Brothers, be sure to check it out. You're not going to be disappointed. And we have droned down all day today. I'm sure this is going to be a long episode. The 100th episode might be like one of the longest episodes, other than when we first started, and we would go track by track on everything. For those that have stuck with us old school, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, but this was also a really good week. Even though my scores tended to be lower than you, my average score this week was 4 stars.
Oh yeah, this is the best week we've had. This is the strongest week. I know I say that a lot, but star-wise, I think this probably is the best one we've had. Next week's going to be pretty good as well. There are a couple bands that we are already familiar with, a couple artists as well. I'm going to run through that real fast. Next week are albums that came out March 5th through the 11th and of the 73. So we have Tom Waits, Closing Time. Faces, Ooh La La. I already know that song. Jon Stewart, Cannons in the Rain. I don't think that's the Daily Show guy, but we'll see. And then finally, Donovan's Cosmic Wheels. I'm already familiar with Donovan from Season of the Witch, but I don't believe that song's on this album, so I don't know. I'm anxious to hear what that's going to be about. I think Luke's going to be back next week with us for Luke's Loves Listening. He's going to have the Birds. You're going to have Canned Heat, The New Age. We've already listened to a little bit of Canned Heat, so I'm sure it's going to be more of that. And then finally, I have Link Ray, Be What You Want To. Link Ray, power chord master. So I'm really anxious to hear that. So for those of you who are listening along, be sure to check those albums out ahead of time, or maybe afterwards. Who knows? There's lots of albums, lots of music, because we had a lot this week. If you haven't checked out Dark Side of the Moon, Doobie Brothers, Captain and Me, and if you're a true fan of experimentation, check out Todd Rundgren's A Wizard, A True Star. I don't think you'll be disappointed. But we have talked long this week about music, so I think I'm just going to close by saying I hope everyone has a happy, healthy, safe week. Listen to all this good music, and take care.